So today I watched this video by Crispy Time about how improvement feels invisible in Bed Wars and how you just need to trust the process. Look, I respect the hustle and messaging, but I think that's actually giving people terrible advice dressed up in motivational language. The original video basically says keep doing what you're doing even if nothing changes because it'll eventually click. Seeds grow in the dark, breakthroughs are invisible until they happen. My counter to that is pretty simple. That's not how skill acquisition works to basically every researcher who's ever studied it in the history of mankind. There's actually a name for doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. It's not persistence, it's insanity. So let me bring some theory and knowledge in here. One of the core questions in TOK is how do we know what we know? The original video is making an appeal to faith. Just believe it's working even when you can't see it. But in theory and knowledge terms, that's using emotion and intuition as your primary way of knowing, while completely ignoring empiricism, actual observable evidence. So here's the research. K. Anders Ericsson, the guy whose work Malcolm Gladwell butchered into the 10,000 hour rule, I don't know if you've heard that trendy piece of nonsense, actually identified 3 distinct types of practice in his 2016 book called Peak. Number 1 would be naive practice, just doing the activity repeatedly and hoping repetition alone improves performance. So that includes playing games, queuing, and doing the same thing for night after night without any kind of feedback loop. Second one would be purposeful practice, having specific goals, getting feedback, and deliberately pushing past your comfort zone every time. The third one being deliberate practice. Purposeful practice plus guidance from an expert who can identify weaknesses and design targeted training. So that's working with a coach, etc. Here's the critical part. Ericsson's research found that once someone reaches a basic level of acceptable performance through naive practice, additional years of repetition do not lead to any further improvement. He studied this across music, chess, medicine, sports. Doctors with 20 to 30 years of experience have actually performed worse on objective measures than doctors fresh out of medical school in some specialties. Time in never equals skill out. So when the original video says every game you lose while learning still counts and reps compound, that's only true if the reps are structured differently every time. If you're just queuing Bed Wars, losing and trying again, and losing the same way, that's naive practice. The reps aren't compounding, they're flatlining. And so are you. You're going to plateau that way. So here's a framework that actually matters here. The empirical cycle, which is the cycle of observation, hypothesis, testing, analyzing, and adjusting back to observation. This is how knowledge is built in every scientific domain, and that's how skill is too. The original video romanticizes the absence of feedback. No new results, no obvious improvement, no proof that what you're doing is working, just effort into what feels like air. To quote him. And the video frames that as noble somehow. I don't get it. There's this educational researcher called John Hattie who conducted one of the most prolific meta-analyses ever on factors influencing learning. He found that specific timely feedback is the single most powerful factor in improving student achievement. Not effort, not repetition, feedback. Without a feedback loop, you're operating blind. You're not a seed growing in the dark. You're a car driving in the dark with no headlights. There's a difference. The seed has DNA, a literal encoded program telling it exactly what to build. You don't have an automated path to Bed Wars mastery in your genome. You need data. So what does a feedback loop look like in Bed Wars or any other skill? Track your stats, win rate, final kills, beds broken. Let's apply this to anything else. Workouts, how many reps you can do, weight, etc. Form, videos, you can track barbell movement if you want. Anything that helps. VOD review, record your games, watch your deaths. Identify the specific decisions that got you killed, not just, I could have won if I didn't lose. That's dumb. Isolate variables. Don't just practice PvP generally. Practice one mechanic, like specifically block-in timing, or let's say jump resetting, or let's say aim. There are many ways to isolate every individual skill here. This is directly relevant to gaming. A Psychology Today's analysis of the Dunning-Kruger effect in multiplayer games pointed out that players can easily brute force their way through single-player or low-elo games using bad habits, and the limited feedback they receive doesn't reveal their actual incompetence. You don't know what you don't know. So when the original video says under the surface, I think a lot is changing, you literally cannot trust that feeling. That is exactly what Dunning-Kruger predicts. The feeling of invisible progress might just be the feeling of being unskilled and unaware of it, and I think that's unequivocally worse than being bad and knowing about it. This is why data matters. Your feelings about improvement are the least reliable source of information. Your stats, your VODs, objective comparisons against better players, those are empirical evidence. If the data says you're improving, great. If the data says you're not, change your approach. I'd also like to rebut the seed analogy. Plant a seed, nothing happens, but roots are growing underneath. Beautiful metaphor, terrible epistemology. Here's why. A seed has a genetic blueprint. It will grow into a specific plant if conditions are met. It doesn't need to choose to grow correctly. The process is deterministic. Human skill acquisition is not deterministic. You can practice wrong for 1,000 hours and get worse through reinforcing bad habits. A better analogy would be the scientific method itself. You form a hypothesis. Let's say bridging will help me win more fights. You test it, play 20 games focusing on bridging and block placements, measure the outcome. Did your win rate change? And then you adjust. If the hypothesis failed, you don't keep testing the same hypothesis, you form a new one. Jeez, it's not that hard. Lastly, the original video says results lag behind identity always, and am I becoming someone worth becoming? This is actually a really interesting philosophical claim. This would be a normative knowledge claim in TOK terms. It's about values and not facts. However, I will give credit where credit is due here. Identity-based thinking is useful for motivation. But here's where it falls apart as an improvement advice. You can have the identity of someone who's disciplined and shows up every day, and you still plateau forever if your method is wrong. Identity gets you in the chair, methodology gets you results. Now that's a soundbite you can take home. The original video creates a false dichotomy. Either you're motivated by results, which is fragile or quitter energy, or you're motivated by identity, which is resilient or grinder energy. But the optimal path is a third option. Be motivated by the process of systemic, data-driven improvement. Track metrics, close feedback loops, adjust when the data says to adjust. Now look, I'm not saying to quit, I'm not saying motivation doesn't matter, I'm saying that effort without analysis is just useless cardio. You're getting tired, not better. If you're in the quiet phase that the original video describes where nothing's changing, the answer isn't to romanticize the struggle, the answer is to ask why isn't anything changing, and go find out. Track your data, watch your replays, get coached, read the research, stop treating improvement like a faith-based exercise and start treating it like what it is, a solvable problem with measurable inputs and outputs. The definition of insanity isn't grinding, it's grinding the same way with no feedback and calling it growth. Seeds don't grow in the dark, they grow in soil, with water, with sunlight. Give your practice the conditions it actually needs. This has been Ashang, signing off.